We're back now with the Hot Box going beyond the headlines. Tonight, will the federal government shut down? We are 1 week away from a deadline in D.C. Earlier today, Joe Donald talked with Oregon Congressman Curt Schrader about what happens next and the situation in Libya.
Congressman Schrader, yesterday we heard there was a deal to avoid a shutdown. Now we're hearing otherwise. Where do we stand right now?
Well, good question, Joe. It goes a little back and forth around here. Looks like we're close on numbers, but certain folks want to have policy put into a budget bill, and that usually is not a good pattern for success. So a little more discussions. Heck, we've got a whole week to go to figure it out.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone's nervous because we've been here before, with all due respect. Do you think it's really a possibility?
Oh, I think it's a possibility. It just depends on how dug in people get. There are some folks that have come to Washington, D.C. that it's all about the politics. They're still in the last campaign, and that's not a pattern for success. There are others that have come to D.C., some of the new ones, that understand you got to compromise at the end of the day. Your one true faithful way of approaching things is not necessarily what everyone agrees to.
Well, how far apart are the two sides?
Well, last we heard, not too far. We've come back down to budget levels. Frankly, I proposed when they were talking about the CR in the $20 to $30 billion reduction ranges from the 2010 budget level. So that's good news. I think that's manageable, perhaps without hurting the economy. You get much bigger than that, and I think you could do some real damage. You start getting into some programs that are actually helping with the recovery. The biggest issues, though, I guess some members of the Republican Party are insisting upon defunding the health care bill, defunding certain Planned Parenthood programs, these types of things that unfortunately just are not going to happen with the Senate or the President.
So the Blue Dog Democrats have been talking to Republican leaders, as you mentioned. They're trying to broker a deal, but Congressman Peterson from Minnesota told Talking Points memo they weren't effective because Majority Whip Kevin McCarthy, quote, talked down to them. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's a lot of room for discussion. Right now I've got a bunch of meetings set up for tomorrow with a variety of different players in the executive and legislative branches here in Washington, D.C. I'm sure others do too. And we're trying to get our hands around things. It will depend on who dictates things. Last I saw, John Boehner was Speaker of the House, not Kevin McCarthy.
Do you feel talked down to then, or no?
No, there's a lot of talking down, around, sideways. I mean, you got to approach this job with a great deal of humility and humor. Different people do things for different reasons at different times. They got to play to their inner constituencies. You know, within their caucus, they've got a big chunk of their caucus is in the Republican study group that's very large and very conservative. Everyone wants to have their say, and a lot of folks, if you give them a chance to have their say and make their point, it can be not accepted, and you can get to that point where you can move forward. So I don't worry about all that.
Okay.
There's no enemies in politics, just adversaries and allies.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Speaker Boehner. Democrats are pushing him to suspend congressional pay in the event of a shutdown. Is that going to happen?
Well, I would support that. I would support that. I mean, let's walk our talk. A lot of Americans are struggling to get by. Oregon, you know, we're still having a tough time in our state, and a lot of folks are struggling to keep food on the table. A lot of people have lost their jobs, taken reduced hours. Public employees have been furloughed. I mean, I think if we're not willing to do our job and come to the consensus, a bipartisan consensus that folks back home expect us to be able to do, that's why they send us here, that's why they pay us the dollars they do, then we should be able to, frankly, take a pay cut if we're not able to get the job done.
Wouldn't that violate the 27th Amendment, though?
Well, I don't know about that. I think it's time for us to kind of walk our talk. America wants to see some shared sacrifice. We're asking everyone to step up to the plate. I think we need to also.
All right, let's switch gears quickly, Congressman, and talk about Libya. It looks like the NATO airstrikes are slowing but not stopping Muammar Gaddafi's forces. Do you think the White House has an end game in mind here, and how do you think this should end?
Well, we had a briefing just yesterday with Secretary Clinton, Secretary Gates, and Admiral Mullen, and some other undersecretaries. And it looks like we're feeling our way through this situation. Obviously, it's been thrust upon us. There's this huge movement for democracy, apparently, in the Middle East. I think most Americans greet the democratization of the Middle East with, excitement. This could be a good thing. We're also, given the fundamentalist nature of that part of the world, very concerned about how it may come out in the long run. So it's a twin-edged sword, I think, for most Americans, myself included. I think we should support the democratic movement out there. Certainly it's got to be better than Gaddafi, who is actually supporting anarchists and al-Qaeda against us. That's a very clear statement. But I think the sense I get from folks here in Congress, and frankly from the administration, is no ground troops in Libya. No ground troops, period.
All right, Congressman Schrader, thank you for doing the people's work there in D.C. for your district in Oregon, and thank you for your time.
Hey, thanks, Joe.
You heard Joe mention the 27th Amendment. That is the one that says Congress cannot adjust its own pay mid-session. By the way, he's Rep. Schrader on Twitter if you want to follow him. And while we're talking about